Masechet Hagigah, page 16. We are going to complete the story of the four who entered Pardes and also begin the next Mishnah, a very famous, important Mishnah, about a long-standing machloket regarding Semikha, putting one's hands on the animal. But first, we complete the story finally with Rabbi Akiva. Allah b'shalom v'yadad b'shalom. He was able to enter into Pardes in peace and also come out in peace. He did not die. He would not go crazy or become a heretic. He was able to handle the experience just fine. Regarding Shir Hashirim, parable to Hashem and Bnei Israel, saying, draw me, we will run after you. The king has brought me into his chamber. This is referring to the king as Hashem, who brought Rabbi Akiva into his inner chamber, and he was able to be there and be only uplifted by the experience and not harmed. Yet even Rabbi Akiva, the angels protecting, tried to push him out. The bodyguards, and say, you don't belong in here. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu told the angels, leave him alone, he's okay. He is permitted to serve my glory. Rabbi Akiva was on a special level. My darash. Now we want to know, what did Rabbi Akiva, how did he know to distinguish between the angels, other divine beings, and Hashem himself? So he was careful not to stare, not to look at what was not appropriate, unlike the others who saw something and they misunderstood what they saw, they looked the wrong way. How did Rabbi Akiva know? We're going to see a few sources, four of them. Pasuk from the beginning of V'zot Beracha, that Hashem came from the holy myriads, like about tens of thousands. So this literally means Hashem came, here to this to a special place. But the word ve'ata also sounds like ot, meaning a sign or symbol. That although there are tens of thousands of angels, there is ot. Hashem has a sign that is distinguishing him, that he is unique among the angels. And so Rabbi Akiva knew to look out for that sign and not confuse the angels with the divine creator himself. Or similarly, says Dagul, my beloved is Dagul, preeminent among the myriads. So Dugma, he is exemplary, different from above the myriad of angels. Hashem is different, and the Rabbi Akiva knew to look out for that difference. So reading Hashem's name as we do, the Lashon Adnut, that Hashem is the master among the hosts. Yeah, there's a big host, there's a lot of army of angels, but Hashem is the master above them all and different. Rabbi Achia bar Abba amar Rabbi Yochanan, lo beruach Adonai, ve'achar ruach rash, lo berash Adonai, ve'achar rash esh, lo ba'esh Adonai, ve'achar esh kol demamad daka, ve'hineh Adonai over. So famous pasuk from Eliyahu Navi says, right? Hashem, he saw wind, and he saw Hashem is not on the wind, and then an earthquake. You might, most people would think, oh, a big earthquake, that's a manifestation of God. No, not there either, and not in the fire, but rather, after all, that was a thin, small voice, and that was Hashem passing by. And so, unlike most people who would think that Hashem is in the great commotion, but no, rather all that's just introduction to, that's just the myriads of other angels and forces and natural occurrences. But Hashem is actually that voice that passes afterwards in the quiet, kind of quiet of meditation, when one can experience that divine. Rabbi Akiva knew this, and so therefore kept that in mind. It was able to not trespass beyond where he was not permitted to go. So now, since we've been talking a lot about angels, we want to tell you something about the angels. And the angels are different from shedim. Shadim meaning demons. Okay, demons were a widespread belief in Persia, very, very popular. It explained a lot of things like, why do like things that we would ascribe. If you just change demons to bacteria or virus, right, it makes a lot of sense. There's little forces that we can't see, but that cause damage in the world. And so there are six things mentioned regarding Shadim. In the three ways, demons are like angels. In three ways, demons are actually like human beings. They have demons have angels, just like have wings, just like angels do. And they can use them to fly from one end of the earth to the other quickly, just like angels do. And demons know what's going to happen in the future, just like angels do. We pause for a second and say, is that really true that angels and demons know the future? How do they know? They don't know themselves. Instead, it's the angels. They have access to insider information, literally inside, beyond the curtain in God's private realm. So sometimes they go and they eavesdrop and they listen in, and they can hear about what's going to happen in the future from behind the curtain, and then they tell each other, and they so that's how they know. But they don't have direct knowledge for it. And the demons are similar to humans in three ways. They eat and drink. That would explain why food goes bad and water evaporates. And they multiply like human beings. And they also die. Demons aren't around all the time. They live and they die. So they're some kind of in-between status. Now, that you mentioned three traits of human beings, let's go to that. There are 6 traits that human beings have. In 3 ways, human beings are like angels, but in 3 ways, humans are the same as animals. Human beings have knowledge, we have rationality, we can think about things beyond us, just like angels do. And we walk upright on 2 feet, just like angels are upright. Unlike animals that go on 4, and we can speak the holy tongue like the angels do. Of course, not all human beings speak Hebrew, speak lots of languages, but the angels speak Hebrew. So the point is that just like the angels speak, they speak Hebrew, human beings also speak language, whatever language they happen to speak. Animals do not have language. But human beings are also like animals in 3 ways, in that we eat and drink like animals do, and we multiply like animals do, and we go to the bathroom like animals do. And so therefore, it's our choice to decide which one we're going to emphasize. Are we going to reduce our higher faculties and be like animals, or elevate our animal side and make everything more holy and more special and be more like angels? Now, going back to the Mishnah, we already discussed somewhat the 4 forbidden questions, but now we're going to discuss further. I understand 3 of the questions that you should not probe deeply beyond our understanding regarding what is above and what is below and what is after. That's fine, because these are things that are still ongoing. But lefanim, what happened before, what's wrong with that? Whatever happened already. So you're not changing anything. It's like, it's past history. So why can't we figure out and try to think about what happened before? It's not affecting anything in the future. רבי יוחנן ורבי אלעזר דאמרי תלווי הוא משל למלך בשר ודם שאמר לעבדיו בנו לי פלטרין גדולין על אשפה הלכו בנו לו אין רצונו של מלך להזכיר שם אשפה. So to answer this, we can explain it by a parable of a king who tells his servants, go and build me a palace over there where that garbage dump is, right? You gotta move away the garbage, clean it up, and that's where I want the palace. So they go and make it. Now, if people are going to pass by and say, oh, let's go to the garbage dump, they're going to continue to call it a garbage dump. The king is not happy about that. So even though this is past history, but now that it's all built and nice, you're going to change the name. You don't want to call it that name anymore. There's one Bet Knesset nearby that's built on a gas station. You wouldn't want people to say, well, let's go to the gas station synagogue, right? That's it. It's not a gas station anymore. Now you change the name. What's the nimshal? A nimshal is that the world first, but way before, was tohu, vabohu, choshech, all chaos, a garbage dump originally, and we discussed a little bit, but we think about more about why, right? Why does Hashem create chaos only to make order out of it? Was there chaos before? Did Hashem create the chaos? Okay, those are questions that are beyond our understanding. And so the point is, don't ask, because it's not respectful. The world is beautiful. God created everything orderly as it should be, and therefore appreciate the world as is. V'hine tov me'od, and don't go back and say, what was before? What were all the other worlds that didn't work out, right? And why didn't they work out? So it's not respectful to talk about the past, that when it used to be a garbage dump. Okay, very interesting. The Mishnah mentioned that anyone who doesn't care about the honor of his creator, and by asking questions that are beyond him, and just trying to figure out underneath what the flaws are in creation, better that person had never come. Better if he has problems about creation, better that he not be created. Midah keneged midah. Mahi. What is this referring to? Rabbi Abba Amar. Zemistakel bakeshet. It's referring to someone who stares at the rainbow. Now, of course, you can look at a rainbow, and we even have to, because there's a bracha. You see a rainbow, you say the bracha. But the point is staring at it, and that would come to worship it as if the rainbow is it is a sign, right? And so as treating it too much like a divinity, and so this would be improper. Rav Yosef Amad. Another opinion says it's someone who violates a transgression in hiding. Mistaker, so in hiding, he says, God can't see me, right? I'm inside. I closed the shades. מסתכל בקשת, הכתיב כמראה הקשת אשר יהיה בענן ביום הגשם, כן מראה הנוגה סביב, הוא מראה דמות כבוד השם. Yechezkel says that the appearance of a rainbow is similar to the appearance of brightness. When he saw this vision of God himself, he compared it to a rainbow. And so therefore, someone looks at the rainbow and says, oh, that's what God looks like. And he's staring at it, thinking that this is what God looks like. He's reducing God. This is something that is physical, appears in the sky, and will therefore misunderstand and go beyond try to go beyond his comprehension, and that would be disrespectful, because you're here, Kevod Hashem. So therefore, don't do that. But of course, to appreciate the rainbow and its symbolism and say the bracha, that of course is good. Rav Yosef Amar Zeha Oved Avera Beset. And the other opinion said it's someone who sins in private. And this follows B'Yitzchak, who says anyone who violates a sin in hiding, it's like he's pushing over God's feet. He's like, move over, God. I want to be here. I want to sit here. How so? Because it said, the pasuk in Yeshaya says, the heavens are God's throne and the earth is his footstool. So God's feet are around here. If Hashem says, oh, I don't want Hashem to see me, right? I'm going to go in private. Hashem is not over here. He doesn't see. So it's as if he is disrespecting God, comparing him, just saying, get out of here. This is so he's pushing over God's feet. And so that is disrespectful, to think that God doesn't know just because you're in a basement bunker that he can't see there. Okay, Ini. Now we have a challenge to the statement of Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, it's worse to sin in private, but we have another statement that says the opposite. The elder said, if a person realizes that his desire, his inclination is overcoming him, and he can't hold it back. He needs to eat a cheeseburger. He's going crazy over it, and there's no way he can control himself. So then here's advice: go to a place where he should go to a place where nobody recognizes him, and dress all in black, showing how he's ashamed that he's come to such a state, and wrap himself in black like a mourner, embarrassed, shamed, and then do what you need to do there, because it's impossible for him not to do it at all. So at least to do it there in private, and do not do not desecrate God's name in public. Don't do it here in the city where everybody sees, and you're going to say, oh, look at that. So instead, go ahead and do it in the middle of nowhere, in private. So this is the opposite, because this advice says, if you need to sin, do it in private. Over here it says, if you're sinning in private, it's even worse. Not only are you sinning, you're disrespecting God to say, oh, he doesn't know, see? And so we answer, the first statement is when a person is capable of overcoming his inclination, and he's totally fine not eating the cheeseburger, but he wants to eat it, and he goes in private to say, see, now God won't see. So that is disrespectful. That's a terrible thing to do. But the second case is someone who, no, he doesn't want to do it, but he's overcome and he cannot control his desire. So he's not going in private because he thinks God doesn't see. He knows God sees everywhere, but rather he doesn't want, it's bad enough that God knows. He doesn't want to shame God, desecrate God's name in public. So he's only going in private, not to publicize the sin, but not because he thinks God doesn't see. And so the reason behind it is completely different. And so actually those two statements can be reconciled with each other. Darash Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Nachmani, Meturgamane Deresh Lakish. Rabbi Yehuda Nachmani was the in Meturgaman, that's the human loudspeaker of Resh Lakish. And you see that even these Meturgamanim, they weren't just repeating word for word, they were learned people themselves. Especially to be for Resh Lakish, you have to understand everything Resh Lakish says and repeat it over. In yeshiva, a lot of times the students, we didn't understand what the Rosh Yeshiva was saying because it was a very advanced level. You always had an advanced student who would give a shiur chazara. He would go and give another shiur after to tell us what the Rosh Yeshiva just said, right? So the Meturga has to be an advanced student in order to do that. Okay, and anyway, this Meturgaman himself taught something important. One who looks at these three things, stares at these three things, the person's eyes will grow dim. There's three things are rainbow, the nasi, and a kohen. Keshet, this pasuk that we just quoted, that there is a similarity between the brightness and the colors of a rainbow and the image that Yechezkel saw in Maaseh Merkava. So staring at it is exploring too much into Maaseh Merkava. Nasi dichtiv natata mehodecha alav. Regarding Moshe and Yoshua, Hashem says, I'm going to give some of the glory, your glory, onto Yehoshua and Moshe, right? Remember, they didn't look at his face because Moshe, who God passed by him, right, and just that passing by gave him divine presence, and so that applies to Moshe, and then that transferred also to Yehoshua, and so too Moshe and Yehoshua were the equivalent of the Nisi'im. They were the highest position of leadership in Israel, and so too any Nasi, like Lehavdil, if you would see the Queen of England, stare at her face, it would not be respectful, right? You kind of glance, look down, and so too out of respect. Just being in that position of leadership over the Jewish people grants a person a sense of divinity. המסתכל בכהנים בזמן שבית המקדש קיים, שהיו עומדים על דוכנן ומברכין את ישראל בשם המפורש. And also someone who looks at the Kohanim when the Beit HaMikdash was up and they're doing Birkat Kohanim, and they're using God's explicit name. So when they were blessing the people with God's name, so then that the Shekhinah flows through their hands. And so to look at their hands would be a violation of looking too much at God's presence, and therefore the person's hands would grow dim. And that's why, although today we're not in Bet HaMikdash and we don't use Shema Meforash, nevertheless the Kohanim cover their hands with a talit in order, because still something special. One should be concentrating on the contents of the beracha and not staring at their hands. And again, another statement by the same the loudspeaker interpreter. Al taminu bereya, al tibtechu be'aluf. Im yomad lecha yesara chato ve'kadosh baruch hu mochel, al ta'amin. He's explaining another pasuk in Semikha that says, "Do not trust in a companion. Do not put your trust." Here they translate in an intimate friend. Aluf could also mean a general, a human being who you think is important. Don't trust them. Even a friend. They're friends today. A rainy day friends sometimes. Okay, that's the simple meaning. But he says, do not trust. He's reading not bereya as friend, but rather bera. Do not trust the evil inclination. When it says, just sin, it's okay. God is very forgiving, right? And he'll be okay with you. No, don't believe that. So how are we reading it? Altaminu bereya and ra ela yesed hara. So read it bera. It's referring to yesed hara. Kishenemar ki yesed lev ha'adam ra. It's our own internal inclination that induces us, tries to convince us to do bad. Ben aluf ela kadosh baruch shemar aluf neurai. Yeremiah says, right, you are my aluf, you are my friend or my leader from birth, referring to Hashem. And so when the evil inclination says to sin, right, don't believe him when he says ba'aluf, that Hashem will be forgiving. It's not true, right? Hashem will not be forgiving for someone who just sins for thinking that, oh, God doesn't care. So it relates to the similar idea before of someone sinning in private. Okay, now Shema Tomar Mi Me'id, and maybe you'll ask a question: who's going to testify? After all, if you do a crime, but no one is there to see it, there's no witnesses. Human court cannot bring you to justice, and so too here, right? Person will say, "I'm doing it in private." There's no witnesses. There are witnesses, and here's a few of them. Avnei beto korot beto shel adam hen me'idin bo shneimar ki eben mikir tizak bechafis me'as ya'anen. Pasuk in Habakkuk says, the very stones of your house. You think you're in private, but the stones are there. The beams are there, right? Those hidden cameras everywhere. The stones shall cry out of the wall. The beams of the timber shall answer, and they will come before Hakadosh Baruch Hu and says, "We were there. We saw." הקדוש ברוך הוא, והחכמים אומרים, נשמתו של אדם מעידה בו שנאמר, משוכבת חכך, שמור פתחי פיך. איזהו דבר ששוכבת בחיקו של אדם, הווה אומר זו נשמה. חכמים say something very deep, that a person's own soul, your own conscience will testify against you. As it says, guard the doors of your mouth from she who lies in your bosom. What does that mean? What lies in a person's bosom? It's his soul that's inside us. And so guard the doors of your mouth, because your soul knows what you're saying, what you're thinking, and that your own soul will testify against you. Yes, this is always, everyone has two guardian angels that follow him around, and they will be the ones that will testify against the person, as the pasuk says. He will command his angels over you to guard you. They're there to guard you, but if you do something wrong, right, it could be the guards will be the ones that will be the witnesses. Last opinion is that a person's own limbs will testify against them, as it says and Yeshaya, you are my witnesses, and I am God. The simple reading is that Hashem needs us to be to testify that He is one God, because we, Bnei Israel, are chosen to inspire and teach the world about monotheism. So Hashem needs us to testify. But that we also learn from this derasha that if each individual is a can testify against himself. His own limbs of his body will say, right? The arms will say, I saw the legs do that, and so on. Okay, and so that is a conclusion of being careful to do things even in secret, including the secret teachings that we mentioned there. And now the next Mishnah, very important, because we learn here about the Zugot. These are the generations of sages, the early generations of sages that lived and were active during the time of the Bet HaMikdash. So we read, Yosef ben Yoezer omer shelo lismoch, Yosef ben Yochanan omer lismoch, Yoshua ben Perach omer shelo lismoch, Nitaya beli omer lismoch, Yehuda ben Tabai omer shelo lismoch, Shimon ben Shatach omer lismoch. We'll pause here. Okay, this is a machloket. There's a braita that says in the early days before Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, this was the only controversy that there was in Israel, but everything else, everyone agreed. Not that they necessarily agreed, but if they disagreed, they came to the Sanhedrin, they voted, and they figured it out. But this is the oldest recorded long-standing controversy. So what was it about? It was about whether to do Semikha or not. Oh, let's explain this. In general, when someone brings a korban, whoever's bringing it has to put their hands on the head of the korban and say something, like the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, he's bringing a chatat offering, so he puts his hands and he says vidui. If it's another kind of offering, the person will say, right, this represents me, and I bring this as Thanksgiving, whatever it is. So that in general, that is done. The question here is regarding korban Hagigah that's brought on the holiday, and it's supposed to be brought on Yom Tov. Now we have a problem because if you putting your hands, not just the hands, as we're going to see, a person would put his entire weight on the animal when doing Semikha. Now, putting your weight on an animal is prohibited on Shabbat and Yom Tov because you're not allowed to use an animal. You can't put a burden on it, and you can't ride an animal. So, therefore, doing that just out of the context of a korban would be prohibited. And so here the question is, can one do that violation, right? Do that that action of using the animal on Yom Tov because it's necessary for the korban? So that's the machloket. So the Yosef ben Yoezer says, shelo lismoch. Yosef ben Yochanan says, yes, you do Semikha. Now, why would you say you do Semikha? Well, that means that according to Yosef ben Yochanan, it's doing Semikha is a necessary part of the korban. So just like you can do shechita and everything else that otherwise are prohibited on Yom Tov and Shabbat, but if you need to do it for the avodah, then that overrides. And also it assumes that you couldn't have done it the day before. Whereas Yosef ben Yoezer would say either that Semikha is a good thing to do, but it's not absolutely necessary, or he might say, yeah, it's necessary, but you could do it the day before, right? Tomorrow I'm going to bring this korban, and I'm doing Semikha now. It doesn't have to be right before, but the ones who say you have to do Semikha will say that no, it has to be done right before you're about to slaughter it. You do Semikha, and then you give it over to the slaughterer. Okay, so that is the machloket. And we have these pairs, and it goes generation by generation. And the first three pairs is the first mentioned. We're going to see that this is the first mentioned is the Nasi, the highest level of leadership, and the second one is Abetin, which is the second to highest head of the court. So the highest always says shelo lismoch, more machmir, and the second one says lismoch, and then so that's true for the second generation and the third generation. And then the fourth generation, we have Shimon ben Shatach omer lismoch, Shema, that's the third generation. Okay, now the fourth generation, Shemaya omer lismoch, Avatalion omer shelo lismoch. And now the order is switched, and it's Shemaya that says, yes, you should do Semikha. Tayon says you shouldn't. And assuming that the first mentioned is the Nasi, so it's not that the Nasi is always the one that machmir, but they're always different. And now here they switched, and the Nasi Shemaya is the one who says it's lenient, yes, you can. Now, Hillel and Menachem lo nechleku. And the next generation was Hillel and Menachem, and they agreed. Hillel says you can do Semikha. So there's one time they actually agreed, but that was short-lived because Menachem left. We'll see where he went. And Nichnas Shammai came in his place. presumably as the Av Bet Din. And then they had machloket again, because Shammai omer shelo lismoch, Hillel omer lismoch. Shammai says don't, and Hillel says yes, you should. Although here Shammai is mentioned first, doesn't, but Hillel was the Nasi. Perhaps it's mentioned first just as a kind of parallelism to the beginning, where the first one is always shelo lismoch, and also he just left, so we just mentioned Shammai, and Shammai came in. So since we're just still talking about Shammai, we mentioned Shammai, but in fact Hillel was the Nasi. And then the Mishnah tells us, Harishonim hayu nesiim, ushnim lahem avot betin. The first person mentioned, except for Hillel and Shammai, was the Nasi, and the second person mentioned was the head of the court. Okay, so very interesting and very important machloket that this is recorded. It's almost like, we needed this. We needed to have a machloket just to mention their names, because if we didn't have a machloket that they disagreed about, why would we mention who they were? We remember the names of the chachamim because of things that they said, like in Pirkei Avot. So at least I guess it's good that they had one machloket, so we know who they were and what their position was. All right. Tenor banan shelosha mizugot harishonim she'amru shelo lismoch u'shnayim mizugot hachronim she'amru lismoch. So 3 of the first pair said not to do Semikha, and 2 of the last 2 generations were Nesiim that said lismoch. So the Nasi himself, right, the first 3 Nesiim said don't, the next 2 Nesiim said yes. All that is according to the Bi Meir. That's a simple, straightforward reading of the Mishnah. However, Yehuda ben Tabai Av Bet Din v'Shimon ben Shatach Nasi. Hachamim switch it around. See, according to the Bi Meir, Yehuda Nitai Ha'arbeli. A quick tangent about Nitai Ha'arbeli. There is no such thing as a name of Nitai. If you look in the original manuscripts of the Mishnah, the oldest manuscripts, his name is Matai Ha'arbeli. Matai, like English Matthew, it's short for Matityahu. That was his name, Matai Ha'arbeli, but the letters look similar. If you take a mem and just kind of split it apart, it turns into Nitai, and that's what made it into our printed editions. Okay, but I didn't mean to point to him. Actually, I meant to point to here, Yehuda ben Tabai is mentioned first. So it seems that he is the Nasi and Shimon ben Shatach is the Bet Din. However, do we say that's the only opinion of Bi Meir? Chachamim say that's the other way around. Not that they have a different version of the Mishnah or disagree with the Mishnah. They might say that Yehuda ben Tabai, even though his Bet Din is mentioned first, maybe for parallelism, because whoever says Shelo Lismoch is mentioned first before, so maybe here also. So anyway, that's the controversy between Bi Meir and Chachamim. Is Yehuda ben Tabai the Nasi? That's what Bi Meir says that, whereas Bi Meir Chachamim say no, Yehuda ben Tabai wasn't actually the Av Bet Din. Okay, so now we want to say, okay, now that we know that machloket, we're going to test it out. Man tana leha de tanura banan. Which of these 2 opinions, Bi Meir and Chachamim, would follow the following baraita? Okay, we're going to quote a long baraita. It's a whole story, and only at the end we'll see what the point of the question is. So let's follow this baraita. Amar Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai, ben Chamayim lo haragti ed zomem. Yehuda ben Tabai, right? So one of these pair. He said, "May I see the consolation if I did not kill a conspiring witness." What he means is that may blessing come upon me, right? May I see consolation for Yerushalayim, because I did in fact sentence an Ed Zomem to death, and I did a good thing by doing that. Not first of all because if he's in fact an Ed Zomem, so he's deserving. He tried to do something bad. What is an Ed Zomem? Let's remember, this is not just a witness that lies. Right, that's just a regular lying witness. This is specifically about one set of witnesses come and say, we saw this person murder in New York on Tuesday. And the second set of witnesses come and say, wait, on Tuesday you weren't in New York, you were in Chicago with us, so you couldn't have been there. So they're not just lying, they would have no possibility of even being there to see. And the Torah says regarding Edim Zomin that they get a punishment, the punishment that they wanted to do to others. Whatever it is, if it was a monetary case, they would have to pay. If it's a capital punishment case, those false witnesses would get capital punishment. And so Yehuda ben Tabai says, I did this. I killed them. And he's especially proud of it because he did it in a case that there was a disagreement between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. See, the Sadducees said that you only give a punishment to edim zomemim if the sentence was actually carried out. In other words, these edim zomemim, they testified. Because of their testimony, the defendant was killed. And now we find out that they were edim zomemim, they weren't even there. In that case, the edim zomemim deserve capital punishment. But if the defendant was not yet killed, right, even if it's very close, but he was saved before, just in time, then you do not kill the edim zomemim because they didn't actually do anything. It was like attempted, but nothing bad actually happened. So the edim zomemim do not get punished. That was the opinion of the Sadducees. The Pharisees, however, look at the word and say, kasher zamam. You have to punish the edim zomemim according to what they tried to do. Tried means only tried, but did not actually accomplish. So according to the Pharisees, specifically, it's after the sentencing, before the execution. It's not a very big window because generally they would take the defendant straight from sentencing and go right out and march to the place where they would do the execution. If during that time the second set of witnesses comes and says, hold it, stop the execution. These people, they were with us in Chicago. It's in that case that you kill the edim zomemim, even though they didn't actually kill anyone. The defendant did not die. The edim zomemim tried. Oh, exactly, tried. Even though they did not, specifically when they did not accomplish their goal, that's when the edim zomemim are killed. That's the case that happened. And Yehuda ben Tabai was so happy that he was able to. By the way, notice that in the Mishnah, they don't have the title rabbi, right? Just Yehuda ben Tabai, Shimon ben Shatach, because the title rabbi was not yet used until after the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is probably the first person to have that title. During times of the Bet HaMikdash, they were just called by their name because this is a period of they were Perushim. These were the Pharisees and didn't yet have that title. But in the Gemara, at least here in the printed edition, does call him Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai. Oh, that's a bit anachronistic. Okay, so he says, I'm especially proud because I did this polemic and I was able to accomplish something against the Sadducees, who were a powerful group. And so he was able to actually execute them against the Sadducees as showing that they were wrong. All right, so Yehuda ben Tabai is so happy about this, but Amar lo Shimon ben Shatach, his colleague, well, we'll see, we know, is it higher colleague or lower colleague, says, Erev nechamaim lo shafachta dam naki, sharem ru chachamim en edim zomemim heragin ad sheyizomu shenehen, ve'en lokin ad sheyizomu shenehem, ve'en melshalimin mamon ad sheyizomu shenehen. Shimon ben Shatach says the opposite. May I see the consolation if you did not shed innocent blood. In other words, saying you shed innocent blood, Yehuda ben Tabai. You should not have killed this person for a different reason altogether, because Chachamim said that you do not punish edim zomemim unless both of them were found to be zomemim. If only one of the pair, you say, oh, one of you were with me in Chicago on that day, could not have seen. But I don't know about the other one. If only one of them is zomemim, then they do not get killed in a capital case, and they would not get lashes if it was a case of lashes, and they do not pay if it was a case of monetary of money. And therefore, Yehuda ben Tabai, you think you did something so great because in your zeal to polemicize against the Sadducees, you overlooked another law that only one of the witnesses was edim zomemim, it was an ed zomem, and therefore you should not have sentenced the person to death. Miyad kibel alav Yehuda ben Tabai she'eno moreh halacha ela bifnei Shimon ben Shatach. Yehuda ben Tabai realized his mistake and he said, I am never going to give a halachic ruling unless Shimon ben Shatach is there with me. What you see from here is that beforehand, Yehuda ben Tabai would rule on his own. If rule on his own, that means Yehuda ben Tabai must have been the Nasi. This is going to be the source of the question. Okay, but it says from now on, I'm only going to be that way. If I make a mistake, you, Shimon ben Shatach, you'll be there with me. And so you have to be there right in the court sitting with me. Now we're just going to quote the rest of the story. Yehuda ben Tabai felt very guilty that he sentenced this person to capital punishment, even though it was not deserved. It was not deserved. And so Yehuda ben Tabai would go and prostrate himself on the grave of that person to show his grief. And a voice was heard. Whose voice? People hearing it sounded like it was the voice of the victim, who was the defendant, who was killed in that case, who was crying out from the grave. The cry of Hevel. Amar lahem kolihu tedeu shelemachar hu met ben kol nishma. Yehuda ben Tabai corrected them and said, "No, that's my voice crying out of guilt that I killed an innocent man, and I can prove it because eventually Yehuda ben Tabai says, when I die, you'll see that you won't hear it anymore because it's my voice." Okay, incidentally to that end of the story, wait, how do you know that the voice stopped because it was Yehuda ben Tabai's voice and he died? Maybe it was all along the victim, the defendant's voice. And now that Yehuda ben Tabai died, he went into the world to come and he appeased the person, the victim, and he said, "I'm sorry." So that's why the victim stopped crying. Or he brought him to the heavenly court and said, "Oh, do you know what he did to me?" And he got what was coming to him. He got his punishment for that, and that's why the victim stopped crying. So it's not necessarily proof of who was in fact crying. And I guess the people around there thought that it didn't sound like Yehuda ben Tabai's voice. Okay, whoever's voice what it was. Now we get to the point of bringing this whole story. Maniha, who would be the author of this baraita, or whose opinion would it follow? Iamat bishlama Rabbi Meir, Dama Shimon ben Shatach av betin, Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai nasi. Hainu deka more halacha bifnei Shimon ben Shatach. If it's Rabbi Meir that Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai was the nasi all along, now it makes sense why he would give a halacha. The word bifnei here doesn't mean the same as it did before. Here it means that since he's the nasi, Yehuda ben Tabai would give a ruling even without Shimon ben Shatach in the courtroom. And before means even in the presence of while he's alive. Because if the nasi is alive and in town in the country, then you have to wait till he's present to preside over the court. And so if Yehuda ben Tabai was the nasi, then that makes sense that he issued a ruling without Shimon ben Shatach there, because Shimon ben Shatach is lower, so Shimon ben Shatach might be down the block, but Yehuda ben Tabai doesn't need him because he's the nasi. Then it would make perfect sense that originally ben Tabai would give a ruling without Shimon ben Shatach, and he said, from now on, I change, and I'm only going to do it if Shimon ben Shatach is in the court with me. Ela im yat Rabbanan de Amri Yehuda ben Tabai av betin, but if Yehuda ben Tabai was the av bedin all along, Shimon ben Shatach nasi, av betin b'fnei nasi mi more halacha, then Yehuda ben Tabai would not have a right to issue a ruling without Shimon ben Shatach there present, right? You're not allowed to do that. The nasi has to be present, and you got to wait for him to come before you issue a ruling. And so he would have had to be there anyway. So therefore, you see, the story seems like it follows only to be meir, and it's a question to Rabbanan. And then we say, Lo, mai kibel alav dekamar istarufed afilu starufed nami la mistarifna. When he says, no, I accepted upon myself all along in the official court, his court, he would make sure that Shimon ben Shatach was there. But here we're talking about to join in someone else's court, some lower court somewhere else, who says, hey, can you, Yehuda ben Tabai, can you come join us on our court? So even if he was only by betin, he'll be permitted to join a lower court without the nasi there. But now he said, from now on, I made this terrible mistake. I'm not even going to join a lower court unless you are with me, Shimon ben Shatach. Okay, so where we resolve that. Now, in the fourth generation, we read that Yasab Menachem v'nichnas Shammai. Menachem left. Where'd he go? He went to evil ways. Same words that were used before regarding Acher. So he did. I don't know. He went off the derech. Rava Amad Yasal Avodat Hamelech. Rava says no. He went into politics. Maybe that's the same, or maybe it's different. Okay. He left the rabbinate. He left being a judge and went to work for the king. Tanya Nami Hachi Yasam Menachem Avodat Hamelech Yasu Moshe Monim Zugot Hamidim Lebushin Sidikon. And we have a baraita that says, in fact, yes, that Menachem he got a job working for the king, a minister or something, and with him left 80 pairs of students who were dressed in silk robes. It seems to be, lamenting the fact that they were preferred this high status of working for the king and left their Torah study. All right, in any case, he left, and that's why Shammai came in. Amar Rav Shemen bar Abba Amar Rabbi Yochanan. לעולם אל תהא שבות קלה בעיניך, שהרי שמחה אינה אלא משום שבות, ונחלקו בה גדולי הדור. Yochanan says something very important, and he says, don't let a shavut be light in your eyes. Shavut means something that is not punishable by the Torah. In Tannaitic sources, it means something that still could be deoraita, but there's no punishment for it because it's not one of the 39 melachot. And in the Bavli, it's categorized as something that is derabanan, because it may lead to something else. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan says, don't let it be light in your eyes. So people would say, I'm only going to follow the things that are Torah law, punishable, but it's only a shavut. No, don't think that, because after all, Semikha, what's the problem of putting your hands on an animal? There's no punishment for that. It's not one of the 39 melachot, right? So Rabbi Yochanan would have thought of it that way, as deoraita, but no punishment. In the Bavli, they categorize it as just derabanan, as a gezerah. And so Semikha, although it's only a shivut, but look how the Gedolei Hador for 5 generations argued about this. This was like their major preoccupation. So you see how important it is to get it right. So, whatever you decide, if it's du semicha or not, permitted or not, take anything that's a shivut seriously. All right, good point. Now, Pishita, yes, of course, you're going to shivut. It's a law. Of course, you're going to take it seriously, whatever it is, even if it's the Rabbanan. Of course, we're going to take everything seriously. Now we say, no, shivut mitzvah is terichale. Yeah, but in this case, it's a shivut that I'm doing for a mitzvah, so it's easy to justify that I'm only doing a violation to Rabbanan, but I'm going to get a mitzvah out of it. No, even so, even if you think you're going to get a mitzvah, if it's not allowed, you can't do it. Okay, nami pishita. Then we ask, but that also is obvious, because if the sages prohibited it, so of course you're not going to violate it even for a mitzvah. The rabbi said you're not going to do it. Why does he have to emphasize, especially that this is especially important? The answer is that Rabbi Yochanan wanted to reject the opinion that the Zugot were arguing about whether you need to do Semikha or not. Meaning in Masechet Besa, this machloket is described in different ways. One is the question, maybe you don't have to do Semikha at all for a Korban Hagigah. And so the opinions that say don't do Semikha because you don't have to do Semikha at all. And the people that say you do have to do Semikha, you do Semikha even on Yom Tov because you have to do Semikha. If that would be the case, then it's not about the importance of Shivut or not the importance of Shivut. The question is just, do you have to even do Semikha or not? So he's rejecting that opinion. Rather, Kamash Malan Bishvut Hu de Pelige, he wants to say that according to everybody, you have to do Semikha on a Korban, on a Shelamim, on a Korban Hagigah in general. And so the only machloket is, how important is Shivut? Is it so important that Shivut, you have to take so seriously, you know what? Don't even do Semikha on this day, right? Do it a different day. Do it before. Or is Shivut prohibited, but it's because it's necessary. You have to do it then, so fine, you do Semikha then. But both opinions would agree that you have to do Semikha. Question is, does it override Shivut or not? And so you see that they were arguing not about the status of Semikha, but the status of Shivut. And so that brings home his point that don't let a Shivut be light in your eyes, that the rabbis were debating whether to push away Semikha, which is necessary according to everyone, because of Shivut or not. So Shivut, either way, is very important. And so therefore learn from other cases of Shivut. Don't say, it's only a light matter. I'm not going to take it seriously. Learn from here that you do take it seriously. Good. Amar Rami bar Hama Shema Mina Semikha bechol kocho ba'inan. So we learn from this that when you do semikha, it's not just enough to just lean a little bit of your hands on the animal. You have to push down on it with all of your weight. Because if not, if you're not that you're putting your whole weight on it, then what melacha are you doing? You're not doing any melacha, so just put your hands on it. In other words, on Yom Tov, you can just rest your hand on an animal. The only problem is making it a burden on the animal, making it hold a burden, or riding it, putting all your weight on it. So if it was just resting the hand lightly, then nobody would have a problem. And therefore, we learned that the proper way to do semikha is with all of one's weight. Now we challenge that. From a Braita. The Midrash says that when you go speak to Bnei Israel, and they will do semikha. So here the word Bnei Israel is specific, meaning the sons and not the daughters. So men have to do semikha, but a woman who brings a korban, and a woman sometimes needs to bring a korban and can bring a voluntary korban, she does not do semikha, need not do semikha. Okay, that's the first opinion. And now we have more about that. Rabbi said, Rabbi Yishmael Omrim, Benot Yisrael Somchot L'Shu. So Tanakh says, no, not at all. But Rabbi said, Rabbi Yishmael said, they don't have to, but they can if they want to, right? Woman says, I want to do semikha. She may. And then we have a story. Amar Rabbi Yosef, Sachli Abba El Azar, Pamachat Hayalanu Egel Shezimche Shlamim, Vebianuhu Lezat Nashim, Vesamchu Alav Nashim. So one time we had this calf, it was a peace offering, and we brought it to Ezrat Nashim. Ezrat Nashim is not the woman section. That's the section that women can go up to and no further, but men went there too. Anyway, they brought their animal there, and the woman also did semikha on the animal in that place. So you see that they're permitted to do it. But he added, but the reason was not because they have to do it, but rather just to give them peace of mind. In other words, they wanted to do it. They don't have to. They're not actually fulfilling anything, but to make them happy, right? So that they feel connected. So fine, you can do it if you want. And so that's what he means by reshut is not actually a mitzvah, but they may do it. Okay, now that's the end of the Braita. Here's the question. There's another prohibition besides putting your weight on an animal on Yom Tov. Even during the week, anytime, you're not allowed to use a kodesh animal for work, right? You can't make it plow. You can't put a burden on it because it's holy, and so it cannot work. So that would be a problem of if you have to do semikha, then for sure it's permitted because you have to do semikha. So it's not doing it for work; it's doing it because it's a mitzvah. Now, if the women are not actually performing a mitzvah and they don't have to do it, and they only permitted them so that they would feel happy that they were able to engage in this. And participate in the ritual. Well, just to make them happy, are we going to violate a law and use a sacred animal and put a burden on it? That would not be right. So from here we learn the opposite, that in order to do semikha, you don't have to put all your weight, you could just rest your hand lightly. And therefore there's no prohibition, and that's the only reason that they might have allowed the woman to do it. So this is a question on Rami bar Chama, who said the opposite, and we answer, no, maybe actually you do need to have all your strength. But to the woman there, in that case, they told them, don't put all your strength, just press lightly on it. But otherwise, in any other case, when men are doing it, they would have to put all of their weight. Wait a second. If that's true, then look at the language that he said when he said not because that the mitzvah of semikha applies to nashim. Now, if they have to, in order to do semikha, you have to put your hands all your weight, and they were only putting it lightly, then they weren't actually doing semikha anyway. It's something that looks like Semikha, but they weren't even doing it. So you wouldn't have to say, not because there is Semikha Banashim, right? They're not a Semikha Klal. He could have said, look, they're not really doing anything at all. They're just like kind of doing a make-believe by putting their hands lightly. And so that language sounds like they were actually doing the same ritual of Semikha with all their weight, the same as everybody else. Rabbi Yameh says, no, in fact, they were putting it lightly. And when he said that, he meant to say one and yet additional reason. He was just adding another reason. So he meant to say is that, first of all, they're not actually doing Semikha because it has to be all one strength, and they're doing it lightly. And another reason is that we want to please them so they're happy, they feel connected, and but in fact they were not putting all their strength on it. So it's a pretty fascinating case of dealing with women's participation in a ritual in the case when they don't have to and their participation could be a problem, but the rabbis nevertheless wanted to do something to so that the woman would feel connected to the korban that they were bringing. All right, Amarav Papa, Shema Mina Sedadin, Asurin. Okay, now a side point, literally a side point about using an animal from the side. So, of course, you're not allowed to put a burden on the back of an animal because that's the main way you do it. What about hanging a burden from the side? That's an unusual way of using it. So, would that be permitted or not? So the Papa says we can learn from here that it's not permitted. Because if it would be permitted to have a burden on the side of an animal, then you would be allowed to do Semikha from the side. This doesn't mean you're putting a hand on the side, but rather we're equating the animal's head with the side. Just like its head is not a usual place that you put a burden on an animal, it would have the same law as the sides. So if were permitted to use an animal's sides, then it would also be permitted to put all your weight on its head. And so since we say that it's a problem to use his head, so too it's a problem to use the sides of an animal. Sedadin asurin, that's his conclusion, that putting it on the side is prohibited. No question mark. And Rav Ashi Amad, however, the next generation, of Papa's fifth generation, Rav Ashi in the sixth generation says, disagrees. One can even say that the sides are permitted. The sides are permitted, but the head is different from the sides because the head is at the same level, the same height as the back. And so even though the head is an unusual way, you don't put burdens on an animal's head, but it's just continuous with its back. So all of that is prohibited. But in fact, it could very well be that the sides are permitted. And so there is no proof from here that the sides would be prohibited. And so all these halachot that we learn from this famous mitzvah of Semikha, and you get a little bit of the taste of the kind of reality, these halachot coming to life with that story of the people actually bringing their korbanot to do Semikha. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen ve'amen.